loud. Okay, so welcome everybody. Today we're doing a little bit of a different exploration using AI. So the Pathwork has a lot of themes and things that it works with, and oftentimes across all the lectures, in various places. And so I've been really enjoying myself using AI a little bit to kind of cross-fertilize and cross-connect the concepts through the lectures, and as they've been developed in the different like each lecture is kind of a lens on it in a certain way, and so then to kind of get this overview, and I did that I think with images, and that was useful. So this time I just felt like, okay, like the guide has a lot of really interesting and different levels of stuff on evil. And so I just was wanting to see, like, okay, like what's this whole broad, presentation that the guide does, throughout all of those lectures. And of course, there's some that are mentioned in other ways, and, there's kind of like certain ones that are much more obviously on that and more involved. So they're kind of like also, you're shown kind of the sidebar of the lectures themselves, so you can always refer to them, and the main concepts are in on the top, and then they kind of, you can keep exploring in more levels. But so this is what I came back with. It said, in the Pathwork Guide lectures channeled by Eva Peirrakkos, evil is not viewed as an independent cosmic force, but rather as energy and consciousness in distortion. The guide emphasizes that evil stems from the separation of humanity's lower self, which is our survival self and our emotional self and our, like our selfish self, in a way, from the divine source. Our fear-based self, our vulnerable self, right? And in some ways, like if you think of the lower self really as the lower three chakras, right? So it's not necessarily just, but the guide talks about it in terms of pride, self-will, and fear, and all of those things, and I think they also fit here, right? So he says, but it's about this separation, of our human self, of our personality self, from the divine source, and that mutates original light, love, and life force into fear, pride, and self-will. So I was kind of looking at kind of correlating those. So, light, I think, is what maybe is, like the pride in some ways. Lucifer was this, bright angel, but it kind of like got distorted. And so I don't know, maybe light and pride, and love, I think, is usually connected with vulnerability and fear. And then the life force, I think, is like gets distorted into our self-will. I'm going to win. I'm going to be on top. I'm going to, control things so I can. And so the fundamental like urge to move and be active and, and engaged in life, gets transformed into this distortion of self-will. But, this is the common, understanding in the very beginning of the lectures. It's like the guide talks about that we have a higher self, lower self, and a mask. And in the personal lower self, it's mostly, this is the pride, fear, pride, and self-will. And so then goes on, he says, the core mechanics of evil, the main lectures and how they integrate and transcend within the soul are structured below. So he breaks it down. The guide does, I guess, and then AI is summarizing for us. So, any comments, questions? I don't want to just kind of keep rambling on, so feel free to chime in here. So the core Pathwork principles of evil. first one that is listed here is distortion of truth. And boy, do we know that one in these days, right? Evil possesses no original creative power. It relies entirely on hijacking divine light and bending it into an untruth, often by taking a partial truth and making it into a rigid rule. So I don't know if people could think of an example. Later on, I asked AI to give us some examples, and so I think some of this does get filled in as we go, but maybe from your own experience. Like, I always know that there's something in me that rebels a lot about partial truths into rigid rules. It's like, and I find that happens a lot and triggers me. So I fight the evil demon of that. I'm not sure that my fight is not anywhere part of evil than the evil I'm fighting, but that's how it feels. Is that that's definitely something that feels bad to me. And then we see all the time in today's world how they're taking sort of half truths and bending it into untruths. And there's another lecture, it's the one I've got up here that we can maybe go into, that are sort of the three principles or personifications of evil. And this is more on the collective level. And he talks about, the spirit or the entity that sort of is, into lies and half-truths and, sort of tricking people. And so the second one is, this way that energy and consciousness can become blocked, I think is where he's going here. So he says, original life force flows freely, but when restricted by fear, defensive psychological blocks, spiritual resistance, it hardens into negative behavior, cruelty, or inertia. So, like I think anytime we're feeling our contraction, and there's a lecture where the guide says, we have to, grant our contractions, which are basically our no, our no's, our no currents, and they're really a part of our divine free will. So we have to have a right to our no. But part of what we're learning is that the no and the contraction around the no blocks the life force, and then we feel disconnected, and it causes suffering. And that sometimes it feels really scary to say yes, or to accept things as they are and not fight, or maybe even just accept them for a minute until we get the guidance of how to respond to a situation that's difficult. We sort of feel like we have to immediately defend, and so all of that then can also be sort of in a situational circumstance, but if it's consistent over time, it hardens into negative behavior, cruelty, or inertia. And inertia, I think, can be different kinds of inertia. It can be a frozen fearness type of thing, or it can be a depressive, sort of inertia as well. And what is cruelty, right? Like, we're all capable of sort of knowing that in ourselves, right? To some degree. And so sometimes it's good to just, wonder about it. What is this impulse? The guide is, talking about a lot of this comes from numbness. And I think we'll get into this a little more as we go forward. But it's through refusing to feel our soft pain, or feel what's real, what's here, that then blocks the life force from moving, and we can't learn, and we get stuck. And so this is part of the suffering that seems to happen. and we can't, we seem to recreate or, not be able to change our, it's a huge thing to change our inner attitude, perspective, character structure. But, it's like the more that we can consciously be aware of it, the more choice we have. And so then the third one is this weapon of moralizing. And, this is what we do to ourselves a lot too. And then we do it to others. But true spiritual maturity avoids dualistic moralizing, which merely represses the shadow. True transformation requires exposing inner untruths without self-judgment. So, it's really hard when we, feel, like sort of shamed or something, and we have to face these places where we feel so shame about it. But if we're feeling shame, we're not viewing it really through the eyes of the higher self, of the spiritual truth, and we're coming at it with our own internal moralizing and maybe a fear of external moralizing. But I know also for myself, like it's like the worst thing you can do. um you know, and the guide often, points that out and says, this does not do any good to moralize with yourself. We have to learn. I like the integration, the acceptance of all of the different parts of us, and again, it's more like, not reacting against something that's in us, even if it is evil, but accepting and acknowledging, oh, there's this part of me that feels this way, right? And then that can actually, be worked with and uh, healed. So, any comments, questions?
That's it's an amazing summary. AI just pulled that out
Mm-hmm.
like that quick.
Yeah.
I mean,
I mean, it takes like all of 20 seconds, I guess, or something.
oh my God. Especially the first, evil possesses no original creative power.
Uh-huh.
Wow.
Yeah,
It
it's kind of the
relies
main
entirely.
point that the guy is saying in one of the lectures. He says, like, we often, either deny evil or we think that it's some kind of thing that, is gonna, separate. And yeah, it's kind of like it's this energy and consciousness in distortion.
Yeah.
Um, so I guess tricksters walk the fine line of evil, huh? Especially with the first one, distortion of truth, right? Because it possesses no original creative power, but hijacking divine light and bending it into an untruth. Um, I would say current president, bit of a trickster, taking a situation, a situation that's happening within the country and using it, to commercialize.
Oh
Well,
yeah.
not
No,
commercialize,
no, this guy is, yeah, and this is like pure evil. And I mean, trickster is a term, usually an archetype used for, not somebody quite like Trump. Now, Trump, I understand, because it is, sort of this tricky way, that he's bending truth, and that kind of thing. I think the trickster is, it's like the motive. The trickster sometimes does that, to mirror us, right? And in some ways, maybe that's also Trump, sort of like in this huge, big, in our face way, and maybe, doesn't really represent many of the people I know, but somehow he has a lot of people that are going for this and kind of relate to this in some way, and so I think there is a way that he is himself, but he's also more than himself. He's a force, a collective force that is exposing itself, which is a good thing. Like the guide is saying, that if it's unconscious, if it's underground, if it's not exposed, then it's more dangerous. And so that's the one thing is, he can't sort of keep his mouth shut or hide it anymore. And I think maybe there was a lot of that going on in the halls of government, and people were just better at being diplomatic, or, like, sort of keeping it, not being so blatantly honest, right? But yeah, I don't, in some ways, he definitely, is, sort of half-truths and lies is his modality, and in this lecture here on the 3 principles of evil, the guide says that's one of the principles of evil.
And then for energy and consciousness, I can see that in myself because I do have these defensive psychological blocks that hardens into inertia and kind of like this I don't care numbness, negativity, like finding negativity in everything, and then using the weapon of moralizing when I find the negativity in everything. Um, and the weapon of moralizing is like kind of like it's a negative pleasure of mine.
Mm-hmm.
It's pointing it out in others, especially if they don't see it within themselves, and I can clearly see it. So it's like point. I'm gonna moralize you because you don't see it within yourself. So I'm gonna
And that's a
poke.
part of what the trickster does too, so yeah, and in your case, it's like it's, and maybe in all cases, there is an admixed, because it's like the exposure, the out, like there's a kind of, you know this is where it's so interesting, because most of the time we really think everything should be black or white, but most things are kind of much more intermixed and blurred. And there's a kind of internal compass with everything, and around intention. And so if our intention, like which is usually like when I'm uh, triggered by authority that threatens me, and I think in here he talks a little bit about, like that it's really this fear-based thing. Um, like I can get, like very forceful, right? And also, like my fantasies might be, when I get mad, of, I want you to feel, like how frustrating this is. So, I want to try to hurt you, right? And, and then there's this whole inner reaction of just sort of hatred, you know, what is that? I don't know. Like, somehow it feels, like at least we can do that, it's like hate. I don't know. So it's all a big study for us. And I don't know that I got, like lots of answers, but I just find, it's like good to be conscious of, these parts of our shadows, and to understand sort of, and the guy breaks it down and, brings out more of it, I think, for us to work with and understand. And then, we could probably even ask some more questions when we, get to the end of this, or, go to a lecture. But he breaks them down now. Like these are kind of the main lectures on evil. And so 134 is one of the earlier ones, besides, the higher self, lower self, and mask, where, he's talking about the foundational structure of negativity. And that's where he explores how separation from divine reality manifests as human cruelty and delusion. And so, we probably, if we get through, this overview, we might take one, start in the beginning, and, sort of go through a series and do a series with these, and actually read the lectures too, because there's always a lot in there. But so then lecture 184 is on the meaning of evil and its transcendence. And that's talking about sort of how to move past psychological denial. And it discusses the danger of repressing our shadow. We must not, we must look at our evil, distorted aspects directly to find our true capacity to love. So, it's really what we're longing for. Maybe when we see our evil and we don't appreciate it, we feel bad about it, or we recognize that that's not what we really want, even though temporarily, yes, that is what we want. Um, you know, like, like there is this way that to look at that deeply and feel clearly maybe the pain that's underneath it, because usually there is pain underneath it, then uh, will allow us to find our true capacity to love. So, he says in another lecture that, love is not a commandment, it's a soul movement. And so we can't say, I must love, or, I want to love, and try to make ourselves love. We have to, move through the distorted aspects directly, and that will help us reclaim our capacity to love. And so then lecture 248 is on the three principles of the forces of evil. And so this is the mechanics of, like collective darkness and sort of the like archetypal personifications of evil in the world. And in a way, I think, like a figure like Trump is in some ways an archetypal personification.
Mm. Definitely.
So, in this lecture, they examine the cosmic and psychological personification of negativity, and it clarifies that temporary evil influences do not mean a person is inherently bad. But this lecture I find, is really interesting because it kind of does name like these main principles. So, like if we understand, maybe we don't always understand our lower self, and maybe it's subtle, so I'm, getting a divorce from somebody that, I used to love and doesn't work anymore or whatever reason, so I can like go on with my life, and, I don't have to feel guilty about, you know, um, choosing a different path. But if I feel like in order to go on with my life, I have to get numb and cut this person off from my heart, then, now the separation, which on one level might be real physically, but again, it's like in this internal place that, tries to cut things out, judge things, push them away, separate. And then it's also from our separation from the divine. And that's where we feel insecure in some way. And we, but so this whole principle of separation is one of the first principles of evil. And then the second principle that they talk about is materialism, which is another one that we can tell is just totally rampant in our world, right? The only we've lost connection with the divine, with anything beyond, this moment and how much money we can somehow, make, and, how much, I don't know, power or something that abides us, right? But yeah, the whole, like huge imbalance of wealth in the economy, is all sort of representing that tendency, I think, of a deep materialistic force of evil that has kind of taken us. It's what's made us consumers and addicts, right? There's no larger, more beautiful thing or something to dedicate our life to. There's no God, that we can connect with. I mean, churches, but somehow, they didn't work for us. And so we just kind of like said, well, it doesn't matter. We can just, do what we want and be who we want. And it's true, we can. So, and then, we see the results of that. And maybe it's by seeing kind of the final, revelation of that direction that we can change our hearts and minds. hopefully, or something like that. But that, and so then, and then the third one, principle of evil is this. I think Steiner actually names this half truths and lies. The guy just kind of describes it, but he does talk about the first one, separation, as luciferic, and I think the materialism is what they call Ahrimanic consciousness. And they say, Steiner talks about these are principles that are part of our dualistic world. It's like they're not inherently evil, but again, it's imbalance, and it's in a way a misunderstanding and a misuse of those forces. So once again, not separate forces, not ultimate evil, but the way that we misunderstand and misuse. And then he talks about lecture 48 that's on the life force, and that talks about sort of the energy dynamics. And it illuminates how darkness is simply the divine life force moving in reverse, running backward due to spiritual resistance. And so, like, there's an energy dynamic, and I don't know whether this is where, certainly he talks in the, spiritual meaning of crisis, that this life force is the most powerful, force in the universe, and it's going, in this direction. And so if it runs up against something in us that's blocking its, movement, it's going to, eventually, take us into crisis of some kind, which, allows things to be shook up a little bit, and maybe, a new possibility comes out of that because we're too hunkered down into something. Um, but there's a lot of interesting lectures, and I think the masculine and feminine energies that the guide mentions, and are part of this life force, and it's these two very different ways. And I think it was maybe in this, but somewhere I was like hearing thinking and reading about how the overactive aspects, it's because that there's just this natural tendency to want to control and have control over what's happening. And the receptive principle really does sit with what is. And we're almost like habitually, like before we even know what it is, we're kind of moving into sort of trying to make it control. And I don't know that it's not that we have to just submit and let everything just stay the way it is. But I think there is this way that if we can rest first in what is and kind of surrender and really pay attention and see what it is, that from that place our hearts are open, we're taking in, and we're deep listening, and then we maybe have some guidance that comes through us that shows us or tells us or helps us offer something or be a certain way that balances and helps the situation or holds it. So I kind of think, like again, it's not that the active is a bad thing, but we're just overactive and it's not in balance, and we don't know how to sort of rest in being first and let the activity really arise out of that place of being, and then it comes out of the place of being in truth. So and being grounded in reality. So yeah, let's keep going because there's quite a bit here. Any comments or questions on that?
Um, yeah. Um, so with the whole distortion of truth and like trying to not um pass psychological denial and separation. So what was coming to my head was like somebody who does scams for a living, right? First they had to separate from and psychologically deny from what they're doing. Say, oh, I'm doing this because they justify it because oh I'm poor, so I need money, right? Then at the second stage is like, oh, they get deeper into it because oh I'm making all this money now from scamming people, right? And diving deeper into that, it's like then it once they get to that point, it's like hard to get out of
Yeah,
because it's now they got all these justifications for why they're scamming and not seeing like what they're actually doing.
yeah. And it's like an addiction, and they justify it like an addict, right? And they, deny, and they're in half lies and, uh, half truths and lies, always, in the scamming action, I mean, that's partly how they get people. It's not like it's kind of believable, right? And so they're manipulating in that way and intentionally. So yeah, I don't know. And then they probably, yeah, justify it, like, and don't think that, well, everybody else, gets theirs in some way, everybody does the same thing, right? It's just, and so again, it's not the worst evil in the world, but all of this kind of stuff, is part of what we're dealing with. And I think with, I mean, it just seems like that a lot of scamming and, that seems to be, the white collar client crime or the, something like that is, way, way more active. And I think it's partly because it's like it's hard to catch them. And, it's kind of like there's not a lot of, ways that we can. And then with AI coming on, I think it's going to get worse. So I've heard that we are, going to really have a difficult time initial, like it's going to kind of break the camel's back when we can't figure out what's real and what isn't. And in the way the guide is saying, yeah, we need to ask what is the truth, as part of how we find our way, in the darkness. And that is the light, in some ways, is to find the truth. So yeah,
And so now thinking of it further is like scamming might not be the worst evil, but now thinking genocide, genocides of people, right? You're
yeah,
separating from a certain and justifying a genocide
absolutely,
because you
absolutely.
say these people are savages or terrorists or
Yep, yep,
whatever label you put on them. You're separating from them, justifying that, and then at the same time going into materialism where like you take the resources from their land and it's like, oh, we're getting all this resources and we're doing a great thing by committing genocide.
yeah. And it's actually, I think I was scrolling down, but we'll get there. Like I asked the guide for some examples, and he gave some, and he said this is on the personal level, and this is kind of the worst, societal level of it, and it's kind of similar to what you were saying. I can't remember it exactly, but yeah, those, exactly, that's exactly how it works, and so, you know, he goes now into, I guess, how to, transcend the inner evil, so we start with also, like, I mean, we can certainly see it in the outside world, but, part of it is recognizing that it's in our shadow as well. And so, one level of the work is to do, our own shadow work. So he says, expose the lower self and unmask the hidden motives of pride, self-will, and fear that mask themselves as virtue. Get all the way through I guess we did, yeah, passive negativity. Somehow I got myself a little lost. Okay. So, and then in projections, cease blaming external events or political enemies for your suffering. Now, like this is difficult for us right now. And it's also not true that there aren't others responsible as well. So he's never saying that it's not real that, people are doing these things to us, right? But he's saying that it wouldn't, you wouldn't need to experience it if for some reason your soul didn't need to experience it. So there's some complicit, maybe there's some negative interaction, and so it's a magnetizing kind of event. But, it's like So he's not, and then at some level we're living through these times because according to the Pathwork Guide, we chose to be here for this, and it's like it's an interesting time because like no other time can we sit on and watch YouTube and see all of this that's going on around the world and see all of this evil being apocalypse, revelation. That means the veil is rent and we're seeing behind the veil. Right? And so what we're seeing is, all of this darkness. But if we just, think about, it's out there, then there's a missing piece. And there's something important about, like each one of us individually also, working with our own. So we end the projections, and then this is the hardest in some ways, at least for me, to surrender the defense, to drop the rigid ego walls that guard against pain, allowing, like we feel like we're going to be taken advantage of, and, they're ripping me off, and, like everything is, so we have to fight, we can't allow that to happen. So allowing the distorted, frozen energy is really what we want is to melt back into its natural and unified state. So, like, again, when we're in defense, we're tense and we're contracted and we're, guarded and defended. And, part of what the guide keeps pointing to is so much of the spiritual path is around learning how to disarm, to relax, to let down, to let go, at least first in our bodies, and then to work internally with, the part of us that says, no, I can't stand this. I have to fight this. I have to, resist this. I have to, strike back at this, whatever, so we can, really work with these energies inside of us. And so we can't always just drop those ego walls, but we can become more and more conscious that when they're there, and then we can work with them, and this is where, sort of they can't relax unless they feel something of a wisdom that's present, that's beyond, and they can trust, right? That can say, it's better to relax. And it's interesting because even rationally, like that's true, right? We can do a better job of defending ourselves, of meeting danger or challenge from a present, grounded, relaxed state than we can in a contracted, defensive, reactive state. So, in some ways, this surrender the defense is a part of that. It's like we are better at protecting ourselves, and protection will come, through the higher self and through creativity and inspiration. As long as we can sort of stay relaxed and grounded and present to what is. So, he's kind of finished that little section, and then I asked, I think, some more questions. So let's see. Well, maybe I lost those others. I had some other things that happened to them. Let's see.
Scroll down. Yeah.
Okay. There they are. Okay. So, so then I said, please take a deeper dive into the causes of evil and give examples. How can we recognize how the lower self separates from God, and how can we change that? So in Pathwork theology, the ultimate cause of evil is separation from God, which is driven by a deep psychological refusal to experience pain, vulnerability, or a lack of ego control. When you separate from the divine source, your natural life energy curdles, turning original virtues into destructive distortions. So that's kind of a overall summary, and then he breaks this down a little more. I think that's an interesting, thing that he's saying there. And I work a lot with, in some ways, the only thing that needs healing is our separation from God. And once that gets healed, everything else is healed, right? So it's kind of like it's supposed to, the answer and the source of all, of our problems. But, what does that mean to, not be separated from God, or, you know, in what way have we, each of us? And for me, I see, I'm going about my day, and often, it's like I don't even think to ask for help, or to reach out. Now I love it because I'm in the woods and I often feel connection to God in nature. And so, I'm not completely disconnected, but, there's a lot of times when, something happens and sort of, you don't think to seek spirit, to center yourself and go into the wisdom of the higher self in that moment. Sometimes later on, but I think, it's like if we were naturally connected to God, we would be continuously guided in that way. And I think that would feel secure and feel, you know, good to us in some way. So the three core causes of evil. The Pathwork Guide outlines three primary psychological pillars that cause evil: our self-will, pride, and fear.
Oof.
So distorted self-will, that's the forcing current, right? And in the cause is the belief that I must get my way at all costs to survive and be safe. So again, these are all our, protector parts, right? But it's these protector parts that become evil in the world in some way. So, and the self-will, like really, has an insistence and like if you have the power, you'll take it, you'll push somebody out of the way and get your space in line, you will have contempt for them, and you will assume that, and so maybe that's pride as well, that you are owed the best, seat in the house or whatever.
Mm.
So, somebody wanting to say?
No, I was agreeing.
Mm,
You deserve the prize more than the other person does.
right,
Basically, it's the seat in the house. You were saying.
right. And so,
And in a situation like Trump, it's like if I can't win, nobody's gonna win.
yeah,
You know, I'll make sure nobody wins if I can't win.
yeah. And so, yeah, and they all kind of, do come together, like interreact together. So, it's like the self-will and the pride and the fear, because all of this, I think, is ultimately, based on fear,
Mm,
um, fear that they're going to get theirs, or we're going to lose, or, that
mm,
kind of thing, right? So he gives us everyday examples and extreme examples. So the everyday example of self-will is, say, controlling a romantic partner. You
mm,
justify snooping through their phone or dictating who they see under the guise of protecting the relationship. But it
mm,
is actually a demands-based manipulation to avoid your own fear of abandonment.
mm,
So that makes sense? And then the extreme example is a tyranny or systemic exploitation, where a leader or a group enforces their ideology onto a population, believing their vision is the only one that matters or is right, or,
mm, mm,
And then pride. So this is what he calls spiritual separation. And he says the cause is the illusion that you are separate from, aka superior to others. Pride creates a hard ego shell that prevents genuine empathy and vulnerability. And so everyday example is Pride would refuse to apologize during a fight, even when you knew you hurt someone. Your lower self convinces you that admitting the fault will destroy your dignity or make you lose. So that's that win-lose thing. And then an extreme example is dehumanization and prejudice. So this is what you were saying, Davis. Believing a specific race, religion, or social class is inherently inferior, justifying cruelty against them because they are not like us.
Oof.
And then fear, which is the very root of defensiveness. And the cause is the ultimate terror of the ego facing its own nothingness, helplessness, or pain. So like at a certain level, like everybody is kind of like in a state of terror they don't even recognize. So we're all basically, I don't know, paranoid schizophrenics, I guess, or something. But, and a part of what, on the existential level, it's like we try to deny and we stay away from, but it's kind of underground in the foundation. And it is, either our own nothingness, oftentimes helplessness is kind of the one death that we can't stand the most, and it just seems like we'll do anything we can to avoid helplessness and to have to feel helplessness, or pain, and so a lot of people, this is ultimately the cause of evil, he says, is our avoidance of our pain. And so to avoid feeling hurt, the soul lashes out or freezes. Right. And so those are the, like the, separation or the aggression. And, and the freeze is like, sort of, I don't know if it's exactly just a separation, but it is a kind of, like, it could be the fear, Yeah, that's what it's talking about, is fear as the rent. So like, and so the fear often comes out. Yeah, this is what he's talking about, as aggression. And I notice in my aggression a lot, what's underneath that is my fear, my paranoia, my expectation of the worst. And then the everyday example is striking first with a cruel comment if a coworker offers constructive criticism. Fear triggers your lower self to attack their character, deflecting attention away from your own insecurity. So then an extreme example would be preemptive war or acts of violence born out of paranoia, where a nation or individual attacks others out of an unverified belief that they are about to be harmed. And that's a part of what, we can use that in Half Lies and Truths, and we can, tell everybody that that's the concern, and then, bring everybody along with us, and we don't even believe that ourselves. But, that's used in different ways. But yeah, we can definitely justify, cruelty and lower, like evil in that way. So then it says how to recognize your lower self separating from God. So separation from the divine does not usually look like a dramatic pact with darkness. I thought that was pretty cool. If the AI would come, it's like we think of, separation from God as being some kind of, selling our soul to the devil or something. And he says, separation from the divine does not usually look like a dramatic pact with darkness. It manifests as subtle, everyday psychological defenses. You can recognize it through these internal warning signs: blame and projection, feeling intensely triggered by others' flaws while remaining completely blind to how you possess those same traits. The righteous rage, experiencing anger that feels deeply satisfying, clean, or justified. The lower self, righteous anger, because it masks underlying vulnerability. Oh, the lower self loves righteous anger. So this is one that I was like kind of interested in, because it masks underlying vulnerability. And that's what I find whenever I go into my, righteous reaction and, against authority or something, it's like, It's because there's fear underneath. There's this underlying vulnerability. Emotional numbness or inertia. Choosing apathy, laziness, or playing dead rather than engaging with life or taking emotional risk. And then using goodness as a weapon. So this is the love mask here, So acting polite, compliant, or overly spiritual on the outside to secretly manipulate people or make them feel guilty. So that's evil too, in some way. And so, these are all our everyday ways of so it's not like, again, moralizing about this on ourselves. So how to change and align with the divine? Transformation in pathwork requires moving through the darkness, not bypassing it. So we have a lower self-defense, we feel the hidden pain, we re-educate the ego. So step one is the honest self-observation without judgment. You cannot change what you do not acknowledge. Catch your lower self in the act, and when you feel a surge of malice, jealousy, or control, name it honestly without beating yourself up. Say to yourself, right now, a part of me wants to punish this person to feel powerful. Or whatever is there, but it's kind of like acknowledge it, right? So we've been doing this in this focusing work, and there it is right again, the guide is saying, AI is saying that's the way. And then uncover the underlying pain, and this is always such a huge key, and I've been talking before too about, how we're so afraid of grief and pain and our feelings in our body and everything, so that's part of why it's hard for us to be, kind of acknowledging all of these parts. But if we don't uncover the underlying pain, the guide is basically saying that is the, foundation of evil. So behind every expression of evil or negativity, behind every expression of evil or negativity is a frozen pocket of pain or fear. If you are acting out in self-will, trying to control somebody, sit quietly and ask, what pain am I trying to avoid by forcing my will here? Often you will find a fear of helplessness, a fear of rejection, or of insignificance. And so then the third step is and this feeling, it's like to uncover it, but I think we need to really feel it, so it's like just knowing it intellectually, or, it's kind of like it's in us, and it's like if we can be with it energetically and actually, connect with it, acknowledge it, hold it, say, I see you, and breathe it, and allow that fear of helplessness, that fear of rejection or insignificance to kind of bubble up inside of us, in this vulnerable part of our child, in this vulnerable part of our humanity, and allow it, and in this connection with the divine light, we need to feel that and our need for the light, for the love. And so when we can hold ourselves in the underlying pain, I think, it's like we can feel also, the divine in some part of our higher self, there in a presence that makes a difference. And so we're always kind of trying to dive under the first layer and into the pain, whatever is the first layer. So step 3 is re-educate the misconception. The lower self operates on childish, faulty logic. So images. If I admit I'm wrong, I will be destroyed. So, that's a belief, an image, but it's a very powerful thing, and inside of us often, it's a good one, good example, because we often feel that way. So he says you must use your conscious mind to re-educate this part of your soul. Remind yourself the truth, right? So we have to hear the truth of this part that feels this way, believes this way, and then we have to go to the higher self and say, well, what's the ultimate truth? And so maybe the higher self then can come in and remind, the fear, that admitting a mistake will not destroy you. It will actually actively free up your energy and connect you to others. And so this is one that often is active in our sense of isolation and, difficulty with connection of other people. And then the fourth step is the daily surrender to the higher self. And, it's interesting to play with this, and it can be in many different ways, but it's kind of, again, reminding us that some kind of regular practice helps us instill and engrave and deepen into these things. So he says, one practice could be to regularly surrender your ego's desires to the divine force within you. So you could practice a daily prayer or intention, that simply says, I give in any, like for the whole day, I want to try to give up my small ego demands to be right, to control and be separate. I open my soul to the flow of universal truth and love, even if it means feeling my own vulnerability. So if you can kind of make that statement that like you probably can't even do, but in your heart that's what you would affirm and what you would like to be able to do, even if you can never even come close to it, just even saying, I ask, I want, this is my direction, my aim. And we don't have to feel any way capable of doing it. We just have to know what we're asking for, and to open to the possibility that we can receive support and help with that. And so then there's one more section that I thought was very useful. I ask, how does our avoidance of pain and vulnerability create separation from God? So, this is kind of keeps boiling down into sort of, this resistance to feeling our pain. And he's saying that, that our separation from God is sort of the main issue. So I just curious, how do they go together? So he says, in Pathwork philosophy, God is not a distant ruler, but the ultimate reality of total connection, absolute truth, and undefended vulnerability. So, beautiful, reframe out of our God images, into what the guide is saying, is the true God. And when we avoid pain, we must construct psychological armor to protect our ego. The armor inherently blocks the divine flow. Here's exactly how the avoidance of pain builds the wall of separation between the soul and God. 1, pain is the gateway to truth. God is absolute truth. When we experience an emotional injury, like rejection or failure, and refuse to feel the accompanying pain, we must twist reality to protect ourselves. So the mechanism is to avoid feeling the pain of I am hurt and vulnerable. The mind creates an untruth, such as I don't care anyway, or they are evil and did this to me. So, both of those, like to not care, to try to go into the serenity mask, to try to go into the, blame, and the victim of the love mask, so are, 2 ways that we can, we distort reality, in order to justify, like in order to avoid the truth of our true hurt and vulnerability. So, and then separation. He says, by choosing a lie to escape pain, we step out of reality. Because God exists only in what is truth, stepping into illusion immediately separates us from the divine presence. So like this world of illusion that we've built through our images and through our defenses and all of that, right, is, our, attempt to escape pain. And in a way, then we are choosing this lie. And then in this place of, like if we believe we're in this place of, that God abandoned us, or there's no light, or it's just, the drudgery and the misery of other egos, on top of, screwing with other egos, or, controlling other egos. It's like, yeah, that's a dark view of what life is, and we can turn very dark in that, right? So, in some ways, we have to remember like things like the beauty of nature, like the light, and the guide says that, this is a planet that has both. And so we can be influenced by both. And, the soul is, choosing in this process of the life journey. So then it talks about how armor actually distorts divine energy, right? It creates separation. It distorts the divine life force, the divine energy. So divine energy is fluid, moving, and open. When we resolve never to be hurt again, we freeze our emotions. And so the mechanism, we tighten our mind, body, and energy field to form a protective shell. And then this creates the separation. This rigid armor acts like a dam in a river. The flowing life force of God cannot penetrate a frozen soul. The energy gets stuck, turns stagnant, curdles into the numbness, depression, and malice of the lower self. So if we can't feel the fullness of the life force in us, if we can't feel the uplift, here comes Skylar, and enjoy, like sort of feel at least some balance, of light in the darkness, then, we can get, into a really dark, deep place. Hey, Skylar. We're sort of going through an AI, summary of the guide's teachings from the different lectures on evil. So then he's talking about, so we're in this section, where we're looking at how, the pain is the gateway to truth, and how, our avoidance of pain is kind of what often creates evil. And so, like how we, in avoiding pain, create this other thing. So we need to be vulnerable, because that's the only way to receive. And so we cannot selectively numb our emotions. If we close the door to pain, we automatically close the door to grace, love, and divine intuition. So a mechanism, the ego demands total control to ensure it never gets hurt. It refuses to say, I am helpless, or I need help. The separation then occurs. God cannot fill a vessel that is already full of prideful self-reliance. And that's where I see, I often unconsciously just go, by refusing to be vulnerable, we signal that our own ego is its own God, effectively shutting out the true source. So the pathwork chain reaction of separation. So reality, a painful event occurs. Choice, avoid and deny the pain. Defense, build rigid ego armor and blame others. Result, hardened heart, numbness, and total separation from God. So the spiritual paradox, pain as the solvent. The guide teaches that suffering is not a punishment from God, but the natural result of running away from original clean pain. So there's a difference between suffering and the original clean pain. And we end up in a state of suffering when we run from and don't go through the original clean pain. So when you finally choose to stop running, drop your defenses and say, I am willing to feel this heartbreak, whatever it is about, completely without blaming anyone. Because most of the time, the pain that we're avoiding is a broken heart, is in some way. Whether it's a broken heart over Trump and the political thing, or the wars, or the, suffering and, of so many people, or your own, it's a broken heart. And so I'm willing to feel this heartbreak completely without blaming anyone. The armor cracks. in that exact moment of absolute vulnerability, you realize you're not destroyed. The frozen energy melts and the divine flow immediately rushes back into the soul. So then I ask to distinguish between healthy, clean pain and unhealthy, repetitive suffering. So he says, in Pathwork terminology, distinguishing between these two states is the difference between spiritual liberation and ego paralysis. So the healthy, clean pain, is like from the source, reality, the truth of the present moment, so the healthy, clean pain is, like what's happening here, just in the moment, and it's a fluid, moving feeling, and it finishes itself. And the ego state is vulnerable and undefended and surrendered. And the result is inner peace, wisdom, and connection to God. So when we can, be willing to feel and go through this healthy, clean pain, then, we stay in connection. So there's this unhealthy, repetitive suffering that creates an opposite thing. And so the illusion is that the ego's refusal to accept reality. So it's kind of like we don't want to face the pain of the moment, what's really happening, the hurt that it is, and so we turn to illusion. We try to, we refuse to accept that, and we try to, do something else, control it, create, pretend, deny, a million things. And then, that results in a movement that is circular, stagnant, and loops indefinitely. And so the guide talks about the compulsion to recreate and overcome, and how, all of these things are kind of in patterns, stuck patterns, vicious circles. So the ego state of this unhealthy, repetitive suffering is one of rigidity, dramatic blaming, or self-pitying. And then the result of this unhealthy, repetitive suffering ends in fatigue, bitterness, and deep separation. So you can see there, one's a benign circle of flowing life, and the other one is this trap. So healthy, clean pain, the gateway to God. Clean pain is the natural, unavoidable response to living in a broken or imperfect world. So this is so important. Like our fantasy, our illusion, our child, we want the world to be different than it is. And it's, in some ways, there's twists of fate. There's, bad things that happen to good people. It's a broken, imperfect world. And so it's the natural, unavoidable experience of living in a broken and imperfect world. So if we can just kind of surrender into that and not fight that, and realize that's, so much of the pain, is, sort of kind of holding it in this way, I think it moves it a little bit, and it helps us feel it cleanly. We're with our grief, whether it's something horrible happening to us in the moment, or we're in the process, or I'm feeling, the pain of, like the destruction of democracy, or the people, that are being so screwed with in these immigration facilities. And, it's just really sad. So, to like not deny that, and not to just go to the anger, but allow ourselves to feel the hurt of it, the grief of it. So this clean pain is the natural and avoidable response to living in a broken or imperfect world. It is the raw feeling of a loss, a disappointment, or a limitation. And we all have those, limitations as we age more and more, or limitations of where we were born, or, our circumstances, disappointment in our, dreams and our desires. So much of it is these raw feelings of loss, disappointment, or limitation. The interesting thing about healthy, clean pain is if we can allow ourselves to really, go into it, it has an ending. It's like we can feel like a wave that washes through us. I often think of like emotion as like an ocean, and it has these waves, and the clean pain feels like this, big wave coming through, and it can feel sharp or heavy or, like really, huge, deep, sobbing, anguish, but it's like a thunderstorm. It passes once it's run its course. It, goes back out to sea. It requires no story. It is purely physical and emotional. It simply says, my heart hurts because I miss them. My heart hurts because this happened, without adding accusations. This expands the soul when you let clean pain wash over you without fighting it. Your heart breaks open. You emerge softer, more compassionate, and more deeply connected to others. So an example, crying deeply and fully over the death of a loved one or the honest end of a relationship, and accepting the sadness without bitterness. So then the unhealthy repetitive suffering, the lower self loop, the repetitive suffering often called recreation or crucifixion of the self in pathwork, is a psychological defense mechanism which is actually designed to avoid clean pain. Like, like we're running from the clean pain from the get-go with this, and this is what we end up with. So real pain is avoided. The ego creates a mental story, it has usually blame me or them or somebody. And then it's this chronic suffering, and it keeps looping. So first of all, it's a mental loop. It relies entirely on a repetitive script in your head. Why does this always happen to me? Or they ruin my life. I know those too. I'm sure you do. It's an operational choice. The lower self secretly chooses suffering because it feels safer to be an angry victim than to be a vulnerable, hurt human being. And so, you can kind of feel that, like somehow I feel less, vulnerable and somehow more powerful if I'm an angry victim, but it's not really the truth, right? So this is where, it's like at one level we need to, realize the negative pleasure and what we're getting out of the, unhealthy repetitive loop. But, and then, we also, need to, see like the consequences of that, because that helps us risk, and it does feel like a risk, doing the other thing, trying to find a different way, shifting into this acceptance and facing in towards the original, clean pain. And so this also, repetitive suffering loop breeds paralysis. It drains the life force energy. It leaves us feeling stuck, tired, and hopeless, because you are fighting a battle against what already happened. I thought that was really interesting, because we can kind of, if we're fighting a battle against what already happened, that is, like hopeless, exhausting, and, it's like, it keeps us spinning. So here's the example. Like we're replaying an argument from 5 years ago every single day, staying bitterly angry at an ex-partner to avoid the raw, great grief of being lonely. So how to move from suffering to clean pain? If you find yourself caught in a loop of repetitive suffering, you can break the cycle by using these steps. First of all, drop the story. Stop focusing on who did what to you. See if you can silence the mental courtroom where you're trying to prove you are right. Locate the feeling, shift your attention out of your head and into your body. Where does the tightness, heat, or ache live? Ask the truth question. Ask yourself, what raw, unprotected feeling am I trying to avoid by staying angry, anxious, and spiteful right now? So we can, that's that attempt to try to go be, like we feel one level of feeling, but if we can peek underneath, if we can ask that question, like what is that distracting us from? What is that helping us avoid? What's underneath that? Because that's what we need to drop into. And then surrender to the vulnerability and allow the true answer, which is usually fear, helplessness, or deep sadness, to surface. Breathe into it. Let it hurt cleanly, without a defense. So that's what I had for that. Let me just break out of the stop share for a minute and see if there's any questions or discussions. We can go back in if people want to refer to any of that. But
Um,
Is that whole AI outline in a document form?
I mean, it's basically I can like copy paste it onto a Google Doc. It's just it was on my Chrome browser has an AI, and so I'm just talking in the Chrome browser, and so it's all filling up a page of one of my.
Can you paste it into a document and put it in and send it to us in an email? I mean, that's something I absolutely feel like I need to own, save, refer to
Uh huh.
often.
Okay.
You
Yeah.
know?
Let me see. Let me see which is the easiest way. There may be more than one, but certainly I can just scroll down and copy paste. Let's see. So let's put it in a Google Doc here while I'm thinking about it, and then I'll email it to everybody when we're done.
Thank you.
See how it comes out when I copy paste too. It
I
maybe.
mean, really, it's such a concise synopsis of
Yeah.
the, you know?
Yeah, and I think I like like continue asking questions or like explore your own like so yeah, but it's all here. So uh, it looks like 20 pages of it. Um,
Yeah, I believe it.
and it did like when I first brought it up. So it may it has links to the lectures and stuff as well. So that's a part of what those pages are is a bunch of yeah, links to the actual lectures where it's resourcing this information.
Could just drag the whatever you email, just drag it onto my desktop, right?
Yeah, you should be able to.
Great, great.
Yeah, or I think I don't know. I mean, it's on a Google Doc, so you should. Well, I don't know. Are you like an iPhone?
iPad. I mean,
Have an iPad,
iMac.
iMac. So I'm not quite sure, like with the Google Doc, but I think there's some way that you're supposed to be able to open it. Like, so it's going to come to you as a link to a document
Okay,
uh, on the cloud,
that's fine. I think I'll be able to manage.
and then you can download it, from there onto your desktop or
Mhm.
Skylar, were you able to make sense out of any of that?
Yeah, it was beautiful actually. I did a screenshot the last little bit. I like that, the pure pain. I kind of feel through it before defenses come in and ego starts talking. But it's interesting because even when I'm trying to feel that clear pain, like the thoughts start coming in, like references and like the consciousness, well, just my ego starts re- like it starts putting labels on what I'm doing, what I'm crying, for example, about, or it is, I don't like that. I like I try to
So here's where the focusing is so important, because I know we don't like it, but it's not going to go away by resisting it or by merging with it. So those voices like will calm down, as you can sort of find your observer self, and relate to them
Mhm.
in a way that just doesn't say whether they're right or wrong, good or bad, okay or not okay, but just that they are. And this is what the guide is saying: just be with what is, right? That's the reality principle. That's, being in the present. And so, yeah, he's guiding us to just be with the pain and to drop the story. But of course, the thoughts come in and the story is, hounding us, right? And so there's a way in which trying to fight the story, I mean, sometimes there's limited success with that or something. What I find is, to try to really shift is, okay, we can actually notice that all of those thoughts are, like overlying a feeling. And so if I can kind of drop out of my head and into my body,
Mhm.
so then like there's two modalities, thinking and feeling. And so it's like shifting modalities, right? And so when we connect with the feeling modality and connect with our own body, that can sometimes calm or, shift out of all of that thought. But most of the time, it's like these voices are something inside of you that wants your attention. You're afraid of merging with them, and so you try to resist them, right? And make them not be there. But what this process of focusing is doing is it's just acknowledging, okay, I see you, and it seems like what you're showing me is a feeling of this, or, a belief of that, or like whatever. And we're just trying to like allow that energy inside of you to feel like you're aware of it, you get it. You don't have to make a decision about it, you don't have to control it, you don't have to make it go away, but you have to, it will subside if it feels seen.
Mhm.
And you don't even have to agree with it, or, you don't have to make it right, or anything like that. You can say, oh, I see, you think I'm, really an idiot because I didn't do that thing, right? And is that right? Is that how you feel? And then maybe it says, yeah, you're an idiot, and, like you left me, with all this pain. And that's where maybe you have this opportunity to drop down below the accusing voice, that's so angry at you or, judgmental of you, and feel what's underneath it.
Yeah, yeah. It's like sitting down with the pain. It's like sitting down with like a meditating, right? Meditating on localizing the pain and just feeling it, or feeling whatever is in a moment during meditation. And then the voices always will be there. But it's interesting because you think that there's just such an emotional moment. And for example, like I'm sitting down and crying, it's very painful. I mean, and you would think you would get a break from those voices, but here they are again. Oh, you feel pity for yourself, or you feel sorry. What do I look like? How long is it gonna take? All kinds of stuff. It's all this
And
noise.
that's not the clean pain. That's all the
Yeah.
other pain, right? That's all the suffering. And so underneath all of that is where you're going to find, just a simple hurt of not being loved, of not being seen, of somebody criticizing you, of,
Mhm.
somebody, you know, not being totally present for you. when you needed them. And then the defense says, well, that wouldn't happen to you if you, looked better, or you did this thing, or you were, more perfect, or something like that. And so then it creates this, alienated, controlling voice inside of us that's always, trying to, it's like what the guide said, it's like basically trying to protect us from something that's already happened, by punishing us so that we'll never do it again, or something like that. It's like, and so it's all part of, like the fear of the underlying hurt. And, because nobody ever just held us in that and helped us drop into it and let this thing move through us, in this natural oceanic kind of way that it does, we're scared of that, and we think that it'll kill us. So it's kind of like a little bit of a shaman's death to begin that practice, to actually sort of drop into that clean pain. But as we do it, we see the results of it immediately, and it'll get stronger and easier to do.
As you were saying that, I was just thinking about how when we were in group, not only were we doing that, but we were also sharing it with a group of people. And so I'm just wondering if that sharing was like an enhanced version of transformation. If you drop into that pain by yourself over and over again, but you have no one to actually share it with, express it to, like we did in group, then maybe it just keeps looping.
And I think that's right. But this is where, the reason why, groups are wonderful and it really is good. But even if you have a group to express it to, if you're not expressing it to yourself, and if you yourself are not in relationship to yourself receiving the expression, so the fullness, the ideal is both, for you to fully express and receive yourself and have a group to share it with as well. And the guide says that our willingness to, be open and in our soft pain and vulnerable and not in our defenses, then, that helps all of us learn. And it's also, he says it's the greatest gift that we can give to each other, because we are all so afraid of being that real and that vulnerable with each other.
Mm. Mm.
But we're also, like equally, if, like, because we don't think that'll work, like this part of ourself is afraid of it inside of us too. And so the higher self, like, can see, no, you're vulnerable, creative, soft underbelly is the most wonderful, divine parts of you,
Yeah, well, you gotta you gotta believe that because if you're in a relationship, sometimes it's like really hard to say to yourself, if I expose this most vulnerable part of me to my partner, you know, that it's going to be okay. It's not going to be damaging, or too much to manage, so to speak.
And here's where also, like, we have to learn how to make that exposure, right? And oftentimes, if we're defensive about it, or we don't accept it in ourselves, then we might bring it out in a, negative way, or, demanding kind of way to have you accept it,
Right.
that my words are, so yeah. So we're learning how to be soft inside, with all of our feelings and our vulnerability. And I think for me, so much of that seemed to really shift and get stronger in that shift where I felt like I could see myself through God's eyes. And, at first it was terrifying because what I saw when I thought God was looking at me was, all my faults and all of my imperfections and all my, and that God was displeased. And, but there was, something in the process of, you know, going into that pain and going into that separation and into that fear that over time, I don't even know exactly how it happened, but then I wake up one morning and I'm aware, of this feeling, of my own, uh, humility and my own dignity. And, feeling that, everything that I've done my life, trying to grow, trying to work, like in some ways, and the guide I think talks about this, he says your identification begins to shift from your problems and your imperfections, to the part of you that has done this work with dedication, you know, and so then you begin to realize, well, who am I, like the one thing I want more than anything else, is to grow, improve, bring forth the best in me.
And be connected to the life force.
Yeah, and it's like we can't do that really. I mean, that's how we will bring forth the best of us is, you know, and so yeah, and knowing that that's my deepest desire, my most essential nature, right? I can feel a union with God.
Yeah.
And I think in when we feel that, that kind of fundamentally shifts our understanding of who we are. And it doesn't make us great or special, or anything like that. But it, and I think, the great and special is part of that idealized self-image, wanting us to be how we should be, to avoid pain, or to avoid difficulty. And so that's where the humility comes in too, it's like we have to just laugh at ourselves for being the fuck ups that we are, and know that, in spite of that, we have love. We are love, and this love, is the universe needs the love to come forth from us, and we need the love to come forth from us.
Um, um, feeling because I was noticing I was like a little we were going through that, how it would constantly refer back to the states of feeling the laziness, the apathy, the frozen, and how I usually feel those frozen parts in my legs and that deep pressure in my chest that, you know, feel that inertia state. Is it okay if I share a little bit about our session?
Sure. It's up to you.
Okay. Um, you know how I go into these fugue states where um I am living in distorted truth, which in my side feels like righteous anger. And now I'm starting to realize that in that righteous anger, but it's really a distorted truth, is that fear that you speak of because I didn't understand before. understand now, that is fear. And I had that same fear, not that same fear, but like a different fear of not wanting to engage in life because I fear of getting rejected, and I feel like everything's gonna be hopeless and worthless and what have you.
Yeah.
And when I really felt into that, especially with the last fugue state that I had a couple of days ago, where in that state I'm unwilling to feel that vulnerability, that pain, that soft pain of I just want to be loved as is, but I fear if I engage in life, I'm going to be rejected how I am. So then maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but at some point, right? With those feelings that I have in the frozen in my legs, the deep pressure in my chest is going to build and build and build because I'm unwilling to feel that vulnerability, that pain. And noticing that just the thought of feeling that vulnerability of the pain of not being loved as is, there was a little bit of clearance and a little bit of like movement going in there, and that deep feeling in my chest was moving a bit. And another fear that I have is if I engage in life and get my heart broken, I will not recover. And I stay stuck in that, and that's what keeps me stuck. That keeps me in that inertia. That keeps that frozen in my legs. That keeps that deep pressure in my chest. And also that that AI reading kept saying about how the main force of evil is the separation from God. And usually, right, I'm always saying, um, kind of like because I don't believe in the pathwork soul journey, that this is the soul journey, right? That everything here is it's a benign universe. I don't believe in that, and that is a separation from God. And now starting to realize that I am feeling not just because of all the fears, is because I'm separating from divine source by not believing and trusting in the universe. Because I fear if I trust in that soul journey, that at the end I would have been wrong, and for trusting, and that lower self would have been, I'm right. I see, I told you so. So
Good. Wow. That was great. That was a lot, and good, good understanding and self-recognition. And yeah, and hopefully you're not, like it seems to me as you're expressing it, it's kind of like it's revelatory and it's useful for you. It's a positive awareness, and not just, it's like we are, this is the shadow work, right? And so like if we don't have, pride, then we don't have shame, then we can face, all of these fascinating parts of ourselves that are, kind of in terror, and we can understand them deeply, right? So this is where, to me, where you got to is beautiful. And then you can see that these parts need your help. They can't cross that bridge without your higher self presence, seeing this, holding their hand, and step by step taking them across. Does that make sense?
yeah. And then here we go again. I already feel it again. I feel the deep pressure again. That blockage of higher self is like, what do you mean higher self? And it's like, the pride. I don't know. Oh God.
Uh-huh. Okay. And so then we need to get curious. Like, okay, so somehow to you that brought up some things, right? So some part of you was talking back or needed your attention, around that, because and I don't know. I mean, when I say higher self, I know one thing I'm referring to, and it seems benign and good, but for you that may, it may bring something else up, right? And so until you can surface that, express and get clear about what that is, and then respond to that from, some other perspective, maybe, it doesn't have to even be the higher self. We have many, many perspectives. Your rational mind may have a different understanding, that, like, all of that, right? But, yeah, and there's, we don't even have to, we can't say, okay, I'm willing to feel it. We just have to start with saying, I think I understand this. I may not even fully agree with it all or, get it, but I think I do, understand that sort of there's a way through that is in, it's the gateway, prayer that the guide gives, by feeling, our pain and our sorrow, is the gateway to our deepest joy. By feeling all of these feelings is the way through. And so, we can not be ready yet to even do that, but we can begin to understand that may make some sense or have some truth to it. And then we can say, okay, help me, I'm willing. Like, I don't know how to do it. Another part of me is like totally in full resistance. I'll never, ever, ever do it. But, the part of me that is my sort of highest conscious awareness recognizes something of truth in this. And I don't know how to follow it, but I want to, so help, right? I'm willing, and if we can give our willingness to God in some way, or to the universe, God, universe, whatever. It's not like a little man up in the sky, right? So if we can give our willingness to that divine principle in some way, it will respond, right? And help us find our way there. But we have to kind of like, that's our free will. And we have to recognize that, we have to, ask for it, choose it. And we, are not expected to do it ourselves.
It's all about the truth, the willingness to see the truth, which is what you just did, actually, by sharing what you shared with us, Davis. I mean, that was your willingness to speak your truth.
And see, look at yourself from, from this perspective that, it's like saying, that it's part of the distortion of the life force, and part of what makes the struggle and the suffering, and like to be willing to just, have that understanding without, I remember like it was over 5 years in TP before, I was terrified of my lower self. And every time I would read these lectures or read about all of this stuff, I would go into abject, mortification and fear and shame, right? So it took me a long time to be able to, openly and honestly just acknowledge, kind of like that deep humility instead of the pride shame, flip-flop thing. And so, but if we can have that level of, humility and just, like look at ourselves, in compassion and deep understanding, in humor, like, there I go again, right? And laugh at ourselves. Those are the, tools that can help us transform all of this, even the frozenness, even the trenched in, resistance, the fear, the broken heart, all of that, right? And it's like, hopefully as you see all of that, like you can see like, wow, there, this is like a big task in a way, right? And when I can see, when I go into my feelings, and feel that, go, drop below all of the, layers of the defenses and everything else to that clean pain. In the process, I am, seeing, like the terror in me to feel that pain. And so then I can have the understanding for my resistance, or my lower self, attempts to avoid it, right? And again, have compassion, right? There's an understanding and then a recognition that all of these parts can't do it alone. They need God. They need the God in me. They need my higher self to come and hold their hand and walk them forward. And that's the part in me that, like does choose, the love or some kind of possibility for the light and, healing and, having like an ego that is not just completely, the plaything or the, you know, of those lower self forces. I mean, we all have some of that and we're all here purifying that. But, we're not those forces, like fully, we're trying to clean that up. But I don't know if we're all one being in some way, everybody, every little bit that we do, helps everybody else. And it mostly helps us because, like our joy comes from, and our fullness and our, pleasure in life, comes from this heart feeling free and full and open. And like you're saying, it's so afraid of being broken and not making it back, that it is not safe enough yet. So we have to kind of help it, and we have to see what's the worst death you're gonna die. It's a good day to die.
Yeah. By the way, you're not alone in all of that, what you're feeling. Most people feel that if their heart is broken, it's sort of an annihilation. You know, they don't want to experience an annihilation. So, let's just make sure we don't get that heart broken, you know.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's like how
So
many
that
times do you need it to be broken to realize that you whole? Like nothing can be truly break.
and how we feel that, like, when we're unable to feel the actual feeling, because we're terrified that it's too much and we can't, like, and then we're resisting, and then it kind of just lives in us sort of in this half-baked way. I think it's like until, we can actually hold ourselves, right? Because there is a brokenheartedness that the child has, like if it feels rejected. And some people are going to reject us, right? It's like, and we don't want to live our lives trying to make everybody love us, because that's not really what our task is either. So in some way, we have to be the ones to not reject us, and we have to be the ones to understand us and love ourselves. And when other people do, reject us or whatever, we can go into that hurt part and hold it and say, yeah, that hurt. I'm with you. Let's feel it, and then, like the releasing of the hurt, which is also like the original wound, right? It'll go right back and be kind of like a releasing of some of the deep well of that heartbreak that maybe even came from other lifetimes, right? But as we surrender into feeling it and letting it just wash through us, every time we rebound with more energy and, and a feeling of more resilience, that, we begin to recognize and trust and not, avoid so much. And then nobody wants to grieve or have their heart broken, so we don't have to go looking for it. But, we all have had it, and we all will. We will experience, I mean, the whole point with, a broken heart, in a way, it's like sadness, grief, loss. And, in the field of time, according to the Buddha, it's like, as long as we're attached to anything, that is, like the suffering of the world, because the world changes, and whatever we're attached to, we have to let go of, we lose, and then we have to grieve it and let it go. and continue forward. And so like this whole process of grieving, I think is like, again, what our culture avoids so much, and why it's an insane culture. It's the numbness of not feeling that original hurt that everybody then is cruel and crazy,
I don't
control.
know. For me, it's like the opposite. Sometimes I feel like I want to be completely broken. I don't know if I chase that or something.
Hmm.
It's it's like maybe I get a joy out of it somehow. That surely doesn't feel nice, but it feels familiar. Maybe that's why.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh. So that seems like a really useful thing to explore more and pursue, Skylar, because there's a way that somehow there's negative pleasure in that, and or there's a like some kind of an image or a pattern that's where we are unconsciously to some degree seeking it out, and and yet maybe consciously it's not really what we want.
Yeah, like the more I'm on the bottom of this, the more I don't know. There's like I can more chances I can start over fresh.
uh
You,
So it's kind of like rather than making a correction midstream, you want to just crash the whole thing and begin again.
Mm,
yeah, yeah. Instead
I
of
know that feeling.
yeah,
And so like somehow, you get to a place where you recognize, it's like it's not what you want, or it's somehow the course is off or something, and then it kind of like it sounds like to me, see if this is right, everything turns against you, and then you go into sort of this isn't it, right? And let's
yeah. It's like fuck it, I give up, and so I walk away.
okay.
Uh, and then I start over, and it's always a excitement to start over for me. Yeah, and the break, it's like how much can yeah, like how much can I break? Like how bad does it like how bad does it have to get to fully die, and what has to die? Like if nothing really, if I'm still, living and moving on alive, then it means that it was it was delusion. I was delusional about it. It's like nothing is really true, can die, I suppose, and maybe I need to experience all those deaths to continue realizing um that it's maybe I'm like running away from something too. I don't.
Yeah, I guess I'm wondering, it's kind of like it seems more like, um, like kind of instead of staying in and feeling into through and out the other side of the experience, it's like you recognize, oh, this isn't, where I'm going, and that's not it. And so you kind of like try to deny it or push it behind you. And before you've completed that, you're, trying it again or trying to, start over again somehow. It just sounds like maybe the original feelings still are not being held in a way that can be helping them, address it. And it's just sort of next, let's try this again. Start all over.
Yeah, or maybe it's imperfect, so I don't. I I pull out. It's imperfect.
And
I
so you
want,
reject it, right?
yeah, I want to restart and try again to see if it could be perfect.
Uh-huh. And so, and this is what the guy is saying about this impulse towards perfection is that it's seriously dangerous.
Hmm.
It's the unconscious child that felt like that would be the pseudo, that would be her solution to not having her heart broken. If only I were perfect, everybody would love me, everybody would, do what I want, everything would be fine. But in order to have everything fine, I have to be perfect. And then we end up, like trying to sort of constantly improve, correct, measure, reject ourselves, right? And so we're never satisfied. The bar is always too high. We always reject it, reject ourselves because we fall below it. And the self-rejection is, this deeper heartbreak inside of us. There's a deep part of our own self that needs to be deeply loved and received by ourself, our beingness. So, but it's all good, and to just explore, like, more of that sounds right, because these are the kinds of little threads, that can help us excavate deeper into these places where the healing can happen. So, all right. Well, I guess we're at our time. So thank you for a good discussion, everybody. And I guess, I don't know, does it feel like we want to maybe just continue and read some of those major lectures and go deeper into the guide's words on it now that we've kind of looked at the overview and just kind of hear directly from the horse's mouth?
Sure. Sounds good to me.
Okay, we'll kind of maybe do like a series on those and just keep looking at both within us and in the world, right? What is this thing about evil? All right.
Thank you,
Work,
darling.
everybody.
Thank you. Thank you.
Bye,
Yes,
Frank.
thank you.
Bye, Skylar.
Bye. Bye,
Good night.
David. Bye, Frank.